The most sophisticated man in Hollywood was sobbing in a bathroom stall at the Beverly Hills Hotel at 11:47 p.m. on April 14, 1968, 20 minutes after the Academy Awards after-party had reached its peak of champagne-soaked celebration. Cary Grant, the epitome of British elegance, the master of romantic comedy, the man who had made debonair sophistication an art form, was sitting on a toilet seat with his head in his hands, his perfect tuxedo wrinkled, his impeccable composure shattered by 6 words that Dean Martin had spoken with the casual cruelty of absolute truth. Those 6 words had stripped away 40 years of carefully constructed persona and revealed something that Cary Grant had spent his entire career trying to hide. He didn't know who he really was beneath the character he had been playing since 1932. The confrontation that had driven Hollywood's most unflappable star to tears hadn't been about money or roles or professional rivalry. It had been about something far more devastating: authenticity. Dean Martin had looked at Cary Grant, born Archibald Leach in working-class Bristol, England, and seen through the elegant facade to the frightened young man who had been hiding behind fictional sophistication for so long that he had forgotten his real self existed. And in one moment of brutal honesty, Dean had exposed that terrified imposter to the most dangerous person in the world, himself. The Beverly Hills Hotel's Crystal Ballroom was the center of the entertainment universe that night, filled with every major star, director, producer, and power broker in Hollywood. The 1968 Academy Awards had concluded 3 hours earlier with In the Heat of the Night winning Best Picture, but the real show was always the after-parties, where careers were made and destroyed in conversations that looked like casual socializing but functioned as high-stakes business negotiations, disguised as fun. Dean Martin arrived fashionably late, as always, wearing a midnight blue tuxedo that had been tailored in Rome and a smile that suggested he was enjoying a private joke that no one else would understand. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who belonged everywhere and was impressed by nothing, stopping to chat with old friends, compliment directors' wives, and tell self-deprecating jokes that made everyone feel more comfortable than they had any right to feel in a room full of predators. Cary Grant had been holding court near the bar for the better part of an hour, surrounded by a carefully curated audience of younger actors, ambitious directors, and society reporters who hung on his every perfectly articulated word. At 64, Grant was still devastatingly handsome, still impeccably groomed, still the living embodiment of what American movies had taught the world sophistication should look like. He was discussing the decline of elegance in modern cinema, lamenting the coarsening of American entertainment, and positioning himself as the guardian of a more civilized era of filmmaking. The problem with contemporary Hollywood, Grant was saying in his distinctively measured voice, is that it has abandoned the very qualities that made American cinema the envy of the world. Charm, wit, sophistication, class, these have been replaced by vulgarity, sentimentality, and lowest common denominator pandering to audiences who deserve better. The group around Grant nodded appreciatively, understanding that they were receiving a master class in cultural criticism from one of the medium's most respected practitioners. Grant's analysis wasn't just entertainment industry commentary, it was positioning himself as the standard-bearer for artistic integrity in an increasingly commercial business. Take someone like Dean Martin, Grant continued, unaware that the subject of his critique was approaching from behind. Enormously popular, certainly. But what does he represent? He's the embodiment of everything that's wrong with American entertainment. Casual, undisciplined, appealing to people's basest impulses rather than elevating them to something higher. The group around Grant suddenly became very quiet, their eyes focusing on something behind him. Grant, assuming his audience was simply paying closer attention to his insights, continued his assessment. Martin represents the death of sophistication in American culture. He makes drinking look glamorous, treats serious artistic endeavors as jokes, and reduces the noble craft of entertainment to mere amusement. He's symptomatic of a society that has forgotten the difference between class and crass. A voice behind Grant spoke with quiet amusement. "That's an interesting theory, Cary. Mind if I hear the rest of it?" Grant turned to find Dean Martin standing directly behind him, close enough to have heard every word of his character assassination. The circle of admirers around Grant suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere, melting away with the speed of people who recognized that they were about to witness something they didn't want to be associated with. Grant's composure didn't falter. It couldn't, because maintaining composure under pressure was the core of his professional identity. "Dean," he said with a smile that was meant to suggest that his previous comments had been friendly professional analysis rather than personal attack. "I didn't see you there." "Obviously," Dean replied, his tone carrying just enough edge to suggest that Grant's public critique hadn't gone unnoticed or unresented. "Please, don't let me interrupt. You were explaining what's wrong with American entertainment. I'm curious to hear your solution." Grant found himself in a position he had spent his career avoiding, exposed, uncomfortable, and facing someone who wasn't going to be charmed into pretending the conversation hadn't happened. But Grant was a professional actor who had built his reputation on never breaking character, so he pressed forward with the same polished confidence that had carried him through 40 years of difficult scenes. "My point, Dean, is that entertainers have a responsibility to elevate their audiences, rather than simply giving them what they think they want. We should be inspiring people to be better than they are, not encouraging them to embrace their worst impulses." Dean lit a cigarette with deliberate slowness, a gesture that seemed casual, but was actually designed to create dramatic pause and establish control of the conversation's rhythm. "That's fascinating, Cary. Tell me, when was the last time you elevated anyone?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Grant expected to be asked about his artistic philosophy or his approach to character development. Instead, he was being asked to justify his existence in terms of positive impact on actual human beings. "I've spent my career creating characters that embody the best qualities of sophisticated masculinity," Grant replied, falling back on the kind of abstract, artistic justification that had served him well in interviews and academic discussions. "I've shown audiences what charm, wit, and elegance can accomplish." Dean's smile was gentle, but his eyes were absolutely ruthless. "Cary, you've been playing the same character for 30 years. The names change, the costumes change, but it's always the same guy. Charming, sophisticated, completely in control, never really vulnerable, never really human. You've created one character, and you've been hiding behind him your entire career." Grant felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't professional criticism, this was personal psychology, and it was being delivered by someone who seemed to understand things about Grant that Grant didn't want to understand about himself. "I've portrayed a wide range of characters across multiple genres," Grant said, his voice maintaining its cultured precision, but carrying an undertone of defensive tension. "My filmography speaks for itself." "Your filmography is 40 years of the same performance," Dean continued with the relentless gentleness of a surgeon cutting away diseased tissue. "Charming, unflappable, sophisticated Cary Grant saving the day through wit and elegance. But who is Cary Grant really? What does he want? What does he fear? What keeps him awake at night?" The questions were devastating because they revealed the central emptiness at the heart of Grant's carefully constructed persona. He had spent so many years perfecting the art of being Cary Grant that he had never developed any sense of who he might be when he wasn't performing. "I don't understand what you're driving at," Grant said, but his voice had lost some of its customary confidence. Dean moved closer, his voice dropping to a level that only Grant could hear. "Here's what I'm driving at, Archie. You've been so busy being perfect that you've forgotten how to be real. You've created this character, sophisticated, charming, always in control, and you've been playing him so long that you don't know who you are when the cameras stop rolling." The use of Grant's real name was like a physical blow. Archibald Leach was a person Grant had deliberately erased, a working-class kid from Bristol who had been replaced by the elegant sophistication of Cary Grant. Hearing that name spoken aloud in public was like having his deepest secret exposed. "You want to know the difference between us?" Dean continued, his voice still quiet but carrying absolute conviction. "I'm the same guy on screen that I am off-screen. I'm not sophisticated. I'm not particularly charming. I don't have all the answers. I'm just a guy who sings songs and tells jokes and tries to make people feel a little better about their lives. That's not sophisticated, but it's real." Grant found himself unable to respond. Every word Dean was speaking was true, and the truth was more painful than any professional criticism could have been. You look at me and you see everything that's wrong with modern entertainment, Dean said, his voice taking on an almost compassionate quality. But what you're really seeing is someone who's comfortable being himself. And that terrifies you, because you haven't been yourself in so long that you don't even remember what that feels like. The room around them had continued its party atmosphere, but Grant felt like he was trapped in a bubble of absolute clarity, where his entire life was being dissected by someone who saw through his performance to the frightened imposter underneath. "I've built a distinguished career," Grant said weakly, clinging to the only defense mechanism he had left. "You've built a perfect prison," Dean replied, "and you've been serving a life sentence as the warden. When was the last time you did anything spontaneous? When was the last time you showed genuine emotion? When was the last time you let anyone see you be vulnerable or confused or just human?" Grant stared at Dean, and for the first time in decades, his carefully maintained composure began to crack. The sophisticated mask that he wore in public, in private, even when he was alone, started to slip, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "You want to know what's wrong with American entertainment?" Dean continued. "It's not that we're too casual or too vulgar. It's that we've forgotten that entertainment is supposed to connect people to their humanity, not help them escape from it. You've spent 40 years teaching audiences that sophistication means never showing who you really are." Grant felt tears beginning to form behind his eyes, a horrifying loss of control that threatened everything he had spent his career perfecting. "I have to go," he said abruptly, turning away from Dean before his composure could fail completely. He walked quickly toward the bathroom, moving through the crowded party with the mechanical precision of someone whose entire focus was on reaching privacy before the breakdown became public. Behind him, Dean watched his retreat with an expression that mixed regret with relief. Regret that the truth had been so painful, relief that it had finally been spoken. In the bathroom stall, Cary Grant sat fully clothed on the toilet seat and allowed himself to cry for the first time in 20 years. The tears weren't just about Dean's words, they were about the recognition that everything Dean had said was true. Grant had created Cary Grant as a character to play. But somewhere along the way, the character had taken over his life so completely that Archibald Leach had disappeared entirely. The sophisticated, charming, always in control persona that had made him famous had also made him a stranger to himself. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt a genuine emotion that wasn't filtered through the requirements of maintaining his image. He couldn't remember the last time he had done anything that wasn't calculated to reinforce the Cary Grant brand. When he finally emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, Grant looked for Dean in the party crowd. He found him near the piano, telling a story that was making a small group of people laugh with genuine delight. Grant watched from across the room, seeing something he had never noticed before. Dean Martin's complete comfort with being exactly who he was, without apology or pretense. Grant approached slowly, uncertain of what he wanted to say but knowing that the conversation wasn't finished. "Dean," he said quietly, interrupting the story. Dean turned, his expression showing concern for Grant's obviously shaken emotional state. "You okay, Cary?" Grant looked at the group of people around Dean, then back at Dean himself. "Could I have a word with you? Privately." They walked out onto the hotel's terrace, where the cool April air carried the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of traffic from Sunset Boulevard. The party continued behind them, but they were effectively alone. "I owe you an apology," Grant said, his voice carrying none of its usual polished confidence. "What I said about you earlier was unfair and unkind." Dean waved off the apology with characteristic casualness. "Don't worry about it. You're not the first person to think I'm a hack, and you won't be the last." "But that's not what I really think," Grant said, his voice becoming more honest than it had been in years. "What I really think is that you have something I've lost, and I resent you for it." "What's that?" Grant was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the lights of Los Angeles spread below them. "You know who you are, and you're comfortable with who you are. I've spent so many years being Cary Grant that I don't know who Archibald Leach is anymore. I don't even know if he still exists." Dean studied Grant's profile in the soft light from the hotel windows. "He exists. He's just been buried under 40 years of performance, but he's still in there." "How do you know?" "Because he's the one who came out here to apologize." Cary Grant would have pretended the whole thing never happened and spent the next 20 years holding a grudge. Archie Leach felt bad about being cruel to someone and wanted to make it right. Grant turned to look at Dean, and for the first time, Dean saw past the sophisticated persona to the frightened young man from Bristol who had been hiding behind it. "I don't know how to be anyone except Cary Grant," Grant admitted. "It's been so long since I was just me." "Start small," Dean suggested. "Do one thing tomorrow that Cary Grant wouldn't do. Eat breakfast somewhere cheap. Talk to a stranger without trying to impress them. Watch a stupid movie and actually enjoy it. See what happens." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, looking out at the city lights and processing the emotional earthquake that had just occurred between them. "Dean," Grant said finally, "what you said in there about entertainment connecting people to their humanity rather than helping them escape from it, that was profound." Dean laughed, a genuine sound that carried no trace of performance. "Cary, I make Matt Helm movies. I'm not exactly Ingmar Bergman. But you're real, and that matters more than I understood." When they returned to the party, something had fundamentally changed in both men. Grant was still sophisticated and charming, but there was a new quality to his interactions, a warmth and spontaneity that hadn't been there before. Dean continued to be his casual, unpretentious self, but he seemed more aware of the impact his authenticity had on people around him. The story of what happened between Dean Martin and Cary Grant that night never became public. Hollywood was built on carefully managed images, and neither man had any interest in revealing the emotional vulnerability that had been exposed. But people who knew them both noticed changes in their behavior, particularly in Grant, who began taking risks in his career and personal life that the old Cary Grant would never have considered. 3 months later, Grant made his final film, Walk, Don't Run, and then retired from acting at the height of his popularity. He spent his remaining years traveling, learning, and rediscovering aspects of himself that he had suppressed in service of maintaining his image. Those who spent time with him during this period said he seemed more relaxed, more genuinely happy than he had ever been during his peak fame. Dean Martin continued making movies and performing in Las Vegas, but he often spoke privately about the importance of staying connected to your authentic self, regardless of what the entertainment industry demanded from you. He had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't applause or admiration, it's the mirror of truth that shows them who they really are, beneath who they think they have to be. The night Dean Martin made Cary Grant cry wasn't about cruelty or professional rivalry. It was about one man helping another man find his way back to himself after decades of being lost in performance. It was about the difference between being impressive and being real, and the courage it takes to choose authenticity over approval. In a town built on illusion, Dean Martin had reminded one of its biggest stars that the most important audience for your life is yourself. And sometimes, the most sophisticated thing you can do is stop being sophisticated and start being human.